Hello and welcome back to El Partido, yet another Spanish football podcast, this time with a nostalgic twist. I'm Nick Bell, your host for this evening, and I'm joined once again by the wonderful Paul, my co-host, who is joining me to talk about a very special footballer today. But first of all, I've got to ask, how are you doing, Paul? You doing all right?
I'm doing good today, Nick. Yeah, absolutely. I'm ready to get stuck into another one. Really enjoyed the conversation last week and the discussion that we had. So this one, I think this one will be just as entertaining for people as well.
Yeah, it really was, wasn't it? And I think it had the perfect blend last week. And if anyone hasn't listened yet, please do go back one episode and listen to our favourite, and I emphasise with favourite, all opinion based Argentine La Liga 11s, where myself, Paul, and our special guest Matt Harrison pieced together the ultimate starting 11 of La Liga Argentinian players. And I don't know about you, Paul, but I got a few people messaging me saying, how could you leave such and such a person out? Or what about this guy? And yeah, it really got people talking, didn't it?
It did, yeah. I had a fair few comments as well about some of the choices. But that's what it's all about, isn't it? Opinions. And, you know, I'm sure when we do something similar like that in future, which we undoubtedly will, it'll get a similar reaction. Maybe some more controversial ones, depending on what we choose to, you know, what country we maybe decide to focus on then.
Yeah, well, maybe there might be a little link in with the play that we're talking about tonight, but that is foreshadowing at its finest. But yeah, and so like I say, go back and listen to that if you really want to. The first episode as well, if you're new to El Partido, we're 3 episodes in now, and it's really starting to grow legs. But we also did a special episode about Rafa Benitez's Valencia, which was a brilliant little episode we did as well there, and reinvigorated me, Paul, to believe that Rafa Benitez is one of the greatest coaches to have ever walked God's green earth.
Oh yeah, definitely one of the most underappreciated, you know, bias being applied to him. Yeah, so Rafa, definitely one of the more underappreciated managers in my view as well. And I think we covered his time at Valencia with enough detail and enough nostalgia around it. But you know, I don't think there's enough people out there who perhaps, based on the conversation we had, that give him enough respect for what he achieved in that period. And I say that despite the fact that obviously he went on to win the Champions League with Liverpool.
Yes, exactly, and it's one of those where I just have a newfound appreciation for him, for Valencia as well, because let's not forget they're having their struggles at the moment. But it's hard to think that, you know, less than a quarter of a century ago they were title winners, they were Champions League finalists. So definitely go back and listen to that episode. It was a lot of fun. But going back to this episode this week, let's rewind the clock back a few days. It was the birthday of one of the greats of La Liga, and someone who truly know how to play beautifully. And if you're Portuguese, you might be seeing where I'm going with this. It was Senhor Ronaldinho Gaucho. It was his birthday. He was 45. I don't know how I feel about that, Paul. Ronaldinho can't be 45.
Yeah, I suddenly feel very old now.
Yes,
It doesn't
exactly.
seem right, does it?
No, it really puts me off. And I think every time I see these kind of birthday posts for players who, you know, me and you watched when we were growing up, you know, we spoke about tuning into the fuzzy ITV Champions League coverage back in, you know, 2002, 2004, whichever one it was. And this was prime Ronaldinho for me. And he is who we're going to be talking about today. So strap in. We're going full Joga Bonito. Ronaldinho and Barca's beautiful football today. But I suppose, like with any story, Paul, we've got to start at the beginning. Ronaldinho as a player, growing up in Brazil, I always had this idea in my mind that it was favela football. It was playing on, little courts in between buildings with, barefoot on the beach. And I think that is true to a certain extent, but he had quite an affluent upbringing, didn't he? Which I didn't really know about before I started to look into this.
No, yeah, you're right. Relatively comfortable by comparison to some maybe other Brazilian footballers. You think more recent players like Gabriel Jesus, who was painting street markings when he was helping out in his local community during the what World Cup was that? That was in 2014.
2014 Brazil, yeah.
There's that famous photo of him barefoot with a can of paint in his hands. Very different for Ronaldinho, who's before him had a bit more of a comfortable lifestyle in Porto Alegre, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Where he was
yeah.
brought up.
I think they moved there as well because his brother was also a footballer who had signed for Gremio. But I think his mum and dad had quite decent professional jobs, so they lived in an apartment building where it was quite, quite comfortable living, for Brazil and things like that. And he had a lot of opportunities that, maybe a lot of other, as we've already noted, Brazilian footballers necessarily didn't get. And that was the fact that he had these options where he could go into different sort of fields. I know he was massive on futsal, which will be no surprise to anyone listening to this podcast that Ronaldinho likes futsal. But it was kind of like he wasn't really into full-time professional football with any kind of passion at a young age. It was all about playing with his mates and playing this short form of football with a lot of skill and flair, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And I think, it probably sounds like I'm stating the obvious here, but that kind of is reflected in the way that he would go on to play the game, professionally. That it was the I mean, we've come to know it as the sort of the street version of the game with the fancy flicks and tricks and playing with a smile on your face and beating a man for fun, which is very much like a futsal approach with it. And I suppose as well, we can't maybe ignore the fact that off the pitch he was quite into the party lifestyle as well, which maybe suggests that compared to some other professional footballers, maybe his interest wasn't as deep rooted, perhaps because he was more interested in enjoying life.
Well, I think he definitely embraced that lifestyle and that passion, didn't he? And I think maybe because it became, I don't want to say so easy for him to play football, because he transitioned from being this, small futsal player, the one that we saw in the Joga Bonito advert with Eric Cantona saying that, to enjoy it, you've got to just play like a kid. And, that player so young looked like he had everything he needed to do. When he eventually decided to transition into, professional, 11-a-side football, it did really come naturally to him. And the fact that they know that Gremio scouted this when his brother was playing there and decided to sign him as well, that was just rocket fuel for him, wasn't it? That's just where he sort of like got the taste for it. And he went, well, actually, I can have fun with this. I'm going to be a professional footballer. And he made his debut at a very, very young age. I think it was just before he was 18 years old. And he was embarrassing legends of the game, not just other players at Gremio. He was putting Dunga on his arse. You know what I mean? Like he just took to it like a duck to water, didn't he?
Absolutely. And I think as well, so, let's not overlook how young he was to be doing that. But to me, even when you look back at those videos of him starting off, he's still playing like you can tell it's him with his movement and that kind of that sharpness, the quick. It's always a drop of one shoulder or a movement from one hip to another. That feint that sells, it sells the opponent, and he's doing that consistently. And to have it from that, the confidence to do that at a young age against when like you say, you're playing against seasoned professionals or some of the established names as well. That's it's quite incredible, really. But he's always had that thing that you kind of I mean, I'm saying this now because we were kids, but when he burst onto the scene, to use a cliched phrase at the moment, but he's always kind of been one of those players that played football in the way that you wished you could. And when he's a kid, he's playing the way that he obviously wants to play. He's playing it with the natural feeling of, yeah, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna try this move, or I'm gonna do that, and just absolute joy to watch, even from those early beginnings.
It was bravery on sort of a level unseen, and this is early days as well. And Brazilian football was full of flair. There was no two doubts about it. But you look at the way the likes of R9 played, it was more direct dribbling and things like that. It wasn't the fancy flicks. It wasn't as you've said, the jinxes, the false sways, and the acrobatics of some of it as well. That we'd seen back heels from Cruyff, we'd seen Maradona doing kick-ups and alley-ooping players, but this just felt different. And the fact that he managed to bring it into professional game as well was really really impressive. And he had the numbers to back it up. He finishes his first season with 22 goals in 47 games. He's utilizing that full futsal skill set to basically embarrass people. As I said before, he caught the eye of Arsene Wenger as well, and he joins the list of many people that Arsene Wenger could have signed as well, which I find fascinating, that he could have ended up in North London rather than ended up in Paris originally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how many players have they said that about with Arsene Wenger over the years that it just missed out on? And obviously, I think for me, and this was only when I've been looking into it for this episode that I realised that St Mirren were genuinely interested in trying to acquire his services. Got to admire the ambition there, haven't you? Really?
Imagine if we would have had. And I can't claim to know loads about St Mirren other than they're based in Paisley, but I don't even think they were SPL at the time. I think they were either SPL new, or they were just going like from what is now the Championship in Scottish football. But no offense, but they're not a massive club that you'd expect to be signing Brazilians, would you, from Gremio?
No, and thinking back to the days when there always used to be a contingent of Brazilians in the Ukraine, for example, Shakhtar Donetsk used to have. I can never really remember there being a similar sort of pocket of South Americans in Paisley or Scotland more generally. I'd love to know if I'm ignorant to that fact that, and there was this band of merry Brazilians that were battling it out in the bottom end of the Scottish table. Please let me know if that was the case, but I'm not familiar with that being true. So it does seem like quite an ambitious attempt by St Mirren there.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the closest I'm getting in my brain right now is maybe Bruno Alves at Rangers, but I don't even think that was the same era. I think that was maybe quite a few years afterwards. But obviously their ambitious move didn't quite work off. But Paris Saint-Germain come in, not the Paris Saint-Germain that we know now, who are obviously colossal, football giants in terms of not just stature, wealth, and commercially. They obviously were the Parisian side back in the early noughties, but they were semi-competitive. They weren't winning the league every year, but I tell you what, they had one hell of a roster, didn't they? Ronaldinho joined with, I think, Nicolas Anelka was there, JJ Okocha, which Ronaldinho, JJ Okocha in the same side. How much would be paid to see that now, Paul?
Just think, you've had there, JJ Okocha ends up at Bolton Wanderers at some point. Nicolas Anelka did a bit of a tour around the Northwest and obviously with Manchester City and Liverpool, Bolton as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you could have had Ronaldinho at St Mirren. So yeah, actually, PSG were quite lucky, weren't they, really, to have managed to attract players from those clubs.
Oh, that's it. I think JJ Okocha ending up at Hull is one of my favourite stories. In the Championship as well, that is, like, not even the Premier League, which is always good. And there's a great fact about Nicolas Anelka. It was something about him winning a trophy in every the top 5 major leagues he's won the league in, isn't he? I think he's the only player to do that. Which again, from a play to go back to the Rafa Benitez analogy, we look at Nicolas Anelka and maybe sometimes people laugh at the career that he ended up having, but tell you what, he represented some absolutely massive clubs.
Oh, he did, and he was a phenomenal striker. I think he had a problem with most of the dressing rooms that he walked into, though. At some point, I think that's why he was quite a nomadic player. But yeah, I could digress on that subject.
yes, exactly. But so Ronaldinho drops in the French capital. He's at the Parc des Princes, and he's surrounded by all these players. It doesn't quite go to plan for him though at PSG in terms of them winning games, winning silverware. But he's immediately spotted. He's immediately recognised as a talent. He's the hottest property probably on the continent after R9's move from PSV to Barca, and people are starting to take note. And I think we get to the 2002 World Cup, don't we? And this is where Ronaldinho really starts to shine as a potential heir to the Ballon d'Or, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I can't talk about that World Cup without talking about the game against England, because I remember being at school and them bringing the telly in on those trolleys with wheels that they used to have. And bring the big TV into the assembly hall. It was early morning kickoff because it was in Japan, wasn't it? Japan and South Korea, I think the hosts were
7 o'clock in the morning or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they were like, right, you can all come in early and we'll put the game on. England took the lead didn't they? And then it was Ronaldinho's free kick that just makes an absolute fool out of David Seaman, really. And I think it was only about 10 minutes later he gets sent off as well, doesn't he? But that free kick alone was just phenomenal, and that's the way on the big stage to announce yourself. The people were like, "Oh, who's this? If they weren't already." He goes on to have another year at PSG. I don't know if he stays for one more season. Before a few clubs again come after him. One of them being Manchester United, who were relatively close, but couldn't meet the fee. And I suppose, really, should I talk about the situation, how he ends up at Barcelona? Should I? Yeah, I'll get into that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one.
So, to keep in mind, thinking back to the first episode we did on Valencia, and we talked about how Barcelona at the time were not really in the running for much. Prior to the summer of 2003, they just finished 6th in the league. It's an election year. You've got Joan Gaspar has just ceased to be president, and Sandra Rosset and Joan Laporta, the one who is currently the president of the club, are both running campaigns to try and get elected. And if I remember correctly, both of them decided that they would try and sign David Beckham. And
they did. Yeah,
it was like their election pledge, which I think afterwards, Joan Laporta changed his message to say, no, I said either David Beckham or Ronaldinho would be the marquee signing, when he realised that David Beckham didn't want to go to Barcelona. And obviously,
well, if I remember rightly as well, I think the way he described it said they had to go out and sign. Like, his motto was, "We've got to sign either Thierry Henry, David Beckham, or Ronaldinho." And he said it in that order, and I know from that they just knew it. And I don't know if you watched the Beckham documentary on Netflix not too long ago, but he was that close to signing for Barcelona. But in the same vein, Sir Alex Ferguson was that close for Ronaldinho signing for Manchester United as well. And it baffles my head to think what we could have seen if Bex had ended up at Barca, and Ronaldinho would have ended up at Manchester United as well. It would have been weird, wasn't it?
Very strange. Yeah, I think it would have. Look at what players United would have had in their squad for the next few years had that move come off. They would have had Ronaldo and Ronaldinho, When I say Ronaldo, obviously I'm talking about Cristiano Ronaldo. They still had Van Nistelrooy then as well, didn't they? Well, he was
Yeah,
just about.
he was just readying to leave for Real Madrid a couple of years later. I think it was 2005. I want to say.
Yeah,
In
I
the
mean,
very
it would have been a very interesting dynamic. I don't think there would have been enough room on the pitch for all of those exciting players all at once, But yeah, so very close to joining United, and Beckham very close to joining Barcelona. Obviously, Beckham ends up going to Real Madrid. So Barcelona waste no time. They pay the £30 million or 30 million. I can't remember if it was still pesetas back then. But I think it might have been the equivalent of 30 million euros now. I'm not very good at remembering currency timelines. But Barcelona make the move, and he joins the club. And this is a time where Barcelona are on the rebuild. They'd just been finished a season where they were knocked out of the Copa del Rey in the first round by Novelda. I think they lost 3-2 to Novelda. They reached the quarterfinals of the Champions League, losing to Juventus in extra time at the Camp Nou. Finished sixth in the La Liga, as I said, behind Real Sociedad, Deportivo La Coruña, I think Celta, Valencia, and Real Madrid champions. So he joins in the summer of 2003, which I think would be fair to say is where it starts a transformation really of the club, and a new era of maybe a bit of a resurgence in terms of results, but also creates an era where Barcelona become not just a winning machine, but entertaining to watch as well. And he's right at the center of that.
Oh, I think I think you don't get Ronaldinho, you don't get Barcelona that we know, especially under Frank Rijkaard, for that few years beforehand. Like you said, we do see the emergence of Lionel Messi a few years later, but ultimately success breeds success, doesn't it? And with Ronaldinho joining here, and getting to pair up with the squad that he was in and the players that they had at the time, it was a match made in heaven. And we look at parallels between, say, like Diego Maradona coming to Barcelona, and we look at the R9 coming to Barcelona and things like that. You look at it and say, well, it's got the same levels of energy, hasn't it? And he just had the freedom to go and express himself and do exactly what he had done at Gremio, at PSG, but on a much bigger stage. And he filled it. He was absolutely sensational.
Yeah. I mean, and his first season, I think the first game is away from home, and the second game is at the Camp Nou, and it's something ridiculous, like a 5 past midnight kickoff or something like that.
Yeah,
and
when he scored his first goal.
Yeah, and it just sent the crowd wild. But this is a time as well. I mean, you think it's kicked off at 5 past midnight, and there's obviously been all this uproar from the fans, but they stayed, and they wanted to see him and what he was capable of. If I'm right in thinking, like, that season, is it it's 20 odd goals he gets in his first campaign there, isn't it? And at least 10 assists. It's an immediate impact. Obviously, Barcelona, we should say that they don't win the league in his first campaign. There, they do the second and third seasons. In fact, the third season, it's a league and Champions League double that they pick up, and he's at the center of it. I think certainly 2005 to 2006 is where he's probably at the peak of his powers.
Yeah, no, I think, like you say, the year that he wins the Champions League and wins the I think that's the same year that he wins the Ballon d'Or, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
And he's just, if you go and watch a compilation of highlights of Ronaldinho at Barcelona, that is when you're getting it. That is where you get to see the compilation of flicks, the daring play when he's cutting in on the left hand side on his right foot and just bending one into the top corner. I was going to mention this later in terms of my favourite goals for Ronaldinho, but I'll mention it now. But the one he did at Stamford Bridge where he's kind of just at the edge of the D, isn't he?
Oh, yeah.
He's on a standing point and he's not going anywhere. He's fully marked up by, I think, John Terry in front of him. And he just jinxes his right foot and then just the gentlest of touches, top bins. And
that if you'd asked me which is my favorite, that would have been my pick as well, because there's just something unique about it, and it's different to all of his other goals as well. It's not got the mazy run and a step over and drop of the shoulder or whatever. This is something, and it's one of those ones where obviously I've watched a fair number of highlights of his in a ruck to having this conversation with you, but there's something about that one that you can watch it from different angles and still be impressed, even though it's 20 years later or so. Really, it's still got there's still a wow factor of it, because, like you say, his left foot is still planted, and he's got three players crowding him around, and it's just magical, really magical. And it's it's cool that it's effectively a toe poke in it, but it's done with the right amount of angle on it that he still manages to get a bit of a spin on it that curves gently. But if you watch the replay, it's a toe cruncher that he's gone with.
To beat one of the best goalkeepers of the world at the time by doing that was just sensational. But I think the biggest thing you take from it is that you watch it and you think, there's an element of thinking, I'd like to try that, and I believe me and you as kids, we all did. Do you know what I mean? Like, say, playing, and there's a big thing on the internet going around at the minute, what you refer to as what I would call cuppies. I think some people might call it Wembley, some people call it singles, whichever one it might be. But we all tried that, and I can remember it in my mind now, down at a park in Kirkham, just outside of Preston, going, jinx of the foot, Ronaldinho top bins, and it was just one of those things where I was just like, I'm absolutely sold on it. And that season where they win the Champions League, and fast forward to the final against Arsenal in Paris, and we look at that and we go, that was Arsenal's and Arsene Wenger's best chance at a European trophy. And they didn't lay a glove because of how good Ronaldinho was that night, wasn't he?
Yeah. I know, and I know it's still a very painful memory for Arsenal fans now. I mean, losing a Champions League finals not ever going to be an easy thing, is it? But I think it's the fact that possibly at the time, it's a couple of years on from the Invincibles, but Arsenal still had an incredible team as well, and Ronaldinho just bosses it. It's the peak of his powers, as we say, and that's the season after as well. I think you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's the season after he's received his standing ovation at the Bernabeu as well in a Clasico.
Yeah. Oh, well, there's CV-worthy things when you're a football player, and especially a football player who plays in Spain. And it is usually, you mark, FIFA World Player of the Year in his first season, if I remember rightly, at Barcelona. He got the Ballon d'Or in his third, fourth season. But this standing ovation at the Bernabeu, it's only been reserved for two players, as far as I'm aware. As Barcelona players, that is, and one is Diego Maradona and the other is Ronaldinho, and that is the category of which we are talking about Ronaldinho. That is the regard he is held in Spain as just a joy to watch more than anything, but also to earn that respect from the Real Madrid crowd is just it's a different level. And I can't claim to remember it watching it at the time, but watching it back, it's kind of like goosebumps a little bit, because it's just so unexpected.
Yeah, it is, and I think as well, if you watch some of the skills he had on show during that game as well, when he's tucked up against that left wing, and he's got like he's standing proud when he's got the ball. Like, he knows that he's on top form in that game. There's something different about him that night. I don't think it's necessarily like his best performance in a Barcelona shirt. I mean, the bar's already very high. It's certainly up there, but it tells you. And look, we should also preface this by saying that this is a different era 20 years ago in terms of the stadium atmospheres, the intensity there. There's it's not quite the, thinking about in 2025. Yes, there's still tension, and there's still a heated atmosphere, but it's become quite diluted nowadays. I think with the match day experience that clubs try to promote, rather than it's you look at the crowd in a Classico now, vast majority of it really is like people with mobile phones taking pictures and stuff. Whereas back then it was a different era. It was very intense and heated. And for him to have achieved again a standing ovation then is
well, we saw the videos this morning, didn't we? I think I sent them to you and put them on Twitter of Luis Figo going back to the Camp Nou, and it's a different level of anger that you would get nowadays.
Yeah.
I can't really compare it to anywhere right now to what it was back then. But like you say, this is how football has ended up one way or another through the lens of a phone, or overly so commercialized that you get a lot of tourist fans. But I don't think Spain's that affected by it at the moment, which is quite good compared to some other countries.
Yeah.
But he was just, like you say, incredible that night. And this isn't when Real Madrid is at a low ebb. They're still okay, but then they're not the height that they would go on to have a few years later. But for Ronaldinho to have the confidence to do that at the Santiago Bernabeu is just insane. And I think that confidence works in his way, because I think him alongside a few other players as well at this time, including the likes of Beckham, including the likes of Ronaldo, we get a new breed of players who are people off the pitch as well. And we've named this episode Joga Bonito, and obviously we've got to talk about those adverts. The commercialization of football pretty much started with this nucleus of Brazilian footballers, didn't it? You sent me the clip of the battle barge where they had the five-side pitch on the boat. And Ronaldinho was a small part of that, let's not forget. He wasn't the main player back then. But getting to Joga Bonito, this idea of playing beautifully, they built it around him. They built the advertising around him. And I don't want to say this caused a distraction for him, but you could see that this happened. The partying gets a little bit more. There's a story about grilled meats in here as well, Paul, that I think you might be able to tell me about.
Yeah.
The distractions are there though for him, aren't they? Did this contribute towards him maybe starting to tail off at Barcelona a bit?
Yeah, there's definitely and I would say looking back as well, it's kind of a sudden drop off for him. It comes he's only actually there for 5 years, but when you look back, there's so many highlights. You'd think he was there for a lot longer. Such was the impact he made, and so so special were some of the moments they had on the pitch. But I think distraction's the right word. He does end up partying quite a bit hard. Obviously, there's the photo of him stood in a pool with 5 girls showing their backsides as well, aren't they? That's became famous over the years. Was it Deco was his sort of close confidant there, and at one point Deco sort of to say to him, "Come on now, you need to calm down a little bit here." Diet wise, he's not necessarily taking himself as or looking after himself as well as he could. There's a few photos. I think it's the start of his final season. He comes back from the summer off, and there's a tummy on him, And I do remember seeing a bit of I mean, it's the English papers, so but I do remember them putting a few pictures up, saying like, "Oh, look at the state," because they like to do that, don't they? The tabloids and stuff. And I think it became quite sad, because if you think about it, when he's at his pom, he's this. He always seemed to have like a smile on his face, doesn't he? He was always there. But then in the last sort of 12, 18 months, he looks tired, and there's the stories of him turning up to training less than aware of what's around him and stuff. I don't want to go on about it too much because it kind of diminishes a bit, I think, personally. But for me, like, I think what becomes quite telling is the fact that end of 2007-2008 season, it leads to Frank Rijkaard obviously being dismissed, partially because it's viewed that he's not able to keep a grip on the dressing room, or maybe he is enabling it in a way. And Barcelona, obviously, as everyone knows, end up with Pep Guardiola taking over, and in Guardiola's first press conference, he basically says we need to start thinking about the squad after Ronaldinho, Eto'o, and Deco. I think and obviously Eto'o says another season, but Guardiola has a very frank and short conversation face to face with Ronaldinho straight afterwards, basically saying, like, you're a great player, but you're not going to rediscover yourself here at Barcelona. And it's it's agreed that he's going to move on, and part of the motivation for that is that for a while, or for a season or two, young Lionel Messi was being taken under the wing by Ronaldinho, and to be fair, Ronaldinho is the one who says Messi needs to come and train with the first team. Messi needs to be involved. He's going to be a superstar. But then Guardiola's also looking at the point of, well, are you being a distraction in the dressing room, and it's time to go on? And I think there's quite a lot of things that you could look into from those last 18 months or so of his time in Barcelona, and think, oh, it's a shame, really, because it would have been great to see him stick around a bit longer rather than go to AC Milan. But
it would have been, and the question that always itches my mind is what could have Pep done with a rejuvenated Ronaldinho? And again, we've got to cast our minds back ever so slightly here and say this is before we get this sort of era of athletes. Do you know what I mean? Like, say, you had the likes of Henry, and we had Xavi was starting to establish himself. There was a young Iniesta in the side as well. So the blocks were there. But if he'd have just kept on with Ronaldinho for a bit, and maybe put in some of the same focus that he's put into some other players over the years to really transform them into the players they become, could he have got that second wind out of Ronaldinho? Because, for me, when he goes to AC Milan, he doesn't go necessarily at his lowest ebb. He doesn't go at his powers. He's not out the door as like a has-been. He goes to Italy, and he's still a force to be reckoned with, really, isn't he? But I would just like to think what could have been for Ronaldinho underneath Pep Guardiola. But we'll never know, I suppose. But it was a shame the way it did end. But we have the memories more than anything.
Yeah.
And he's still so well revered at Barcelona as well, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. He is. I think he returned for a Legends game. I mean, I think they've had a few of these now, but the first time he came back to Barcelona, there was a very special ovation for him when he returned, and he's clearly loved by the fans. I think, just thinking back to some of the stories, and obviously talking about how off the pitch as well, that there was some distractions for him. You got to bear in mind as well that he was essentially, his entourage looked after his finances and things for him. Money wasn't a problem for him. And there's this great story that he genuinely did not know what a bank was or how a bank worked. And he I mean, this is a story. I believe it was Deco that also tells this story, that Ronaldinho genuinely didn't know that you could go to a bank and withdraw money. And one day they were out and about in the town, and they said, well, "Let's go to a bank." And a huge poster of Ronaldinho is adorning this bank because it's part of whatever sponsorship deal he'd been paid to do. And his poster is up on the bank, and he's like, I still don't really understand the concept of what this building is.
this just goes to show the over commercialization of footballers at that time as well. Like there still is the over commercialization of football. It seemed to be on steroids back then with the adverts. To go back to another one, I'm sure he was in the Pepsi advert as well with Beckham and Zidane and people like that, because this wasn't an Adidas Nike thing. It was just we're all Pepsi ambassadors, and they're all in that cowboy western bar. It's just like that going, you know what? It kind of feels fever dream right now that actually happened.
Well, if you think about it, I remember that because when you'd get the Pepsi cans, it had like the different faces of the footballers on it. I don't know if it was like a collect, one with all, collect them all. I don't think it was quite like that, but the individual cans had the different ones on. And at the same time, this was when footballers were starting to get their own boot deals, where Adidas or whoever did, Nike might have done their own Ronaldinho, special edition boots, and that was really when it kicked off. I mean, I think that sort of thing has probably died out now. I mean, it's been that long since I even wore or bought a pair of football boots or had the need to. But I do remember particularly, like, in my, it was like early teens, where they were like, oh, there's the latest Adidas whatever, and it's a Ronaldinho boot or whatever that was about, and that was the time when it was really at its peak, wasn't it? The commercialization or the commoditization of individual players.
Well, I used to be I sucked on that teat as much as I ever could. My birthday's on Boxing Day, so I used to get Christmas and birthday presents combined, and every year it was, I want the proper football boots, and it was always, I'm a massive David Beckham fanboy, me, like, just everything about him I'm obsessed with. But there was one year where, for some strange reason, and bear in mind that I always spent my career in air quotes on a podcast as a right back, I just went, you know what? I really fancy the white and gold Ronaldinho Tempos by Nike. I reckon I can look great in them, and I reckon I can, do some damage in them. I looked fantastic, and if looks won your football games, we'd win a lot more. In reality, they were the clunkiest boots I ever owned. I didn't know how to use them properly. But again, he just sold them to me because there was the advert where he laced them up, didn't he? And he had them delivered in a special box. He racked like 3 shots from about 25 yards off the crossbar. Took it on his chest, did it again. Took it on his chest, did it again. I was like, I could do that.
Well, that video was released about 2005 or 6 or something, and that was the first video on YouTube to get 1 million views.
Was it? Oh, see, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. That is because I remember watching it about 1,000 times, thinking I can do that if I buy those boots. I could be like Ronaldinho. And even the sleeveless Barca top, I remember asking my mum for one, and this is before I was a Malaga fan and things like that, and it was this luminous sleeveless Barca top, and I went, Mum, I'd really like that. Mum went, Nick, live in Blackpool, you'll get bullied if you buy that. So I was like, all right, cheers, Mum, probably right. But yeah, no, for Ronaldinho after Barcelona, like you say, he didn't whimper out. I really enjoyed his time in Milan to watch what he did in Serie A. Obviously gets to play European football still, teams up with, Pirlo, Gattuso. I think there was I don't know if there was a crossover with Kaká.
I'm trying to think now. So, Kaká was he joined Real Madrid. Was it this summer of 2009, or was it summer of So it must have been summer 2009 because Manchester City had tried to sign him in the January of 2009. So. Yeah, so there would have been at least 12 months or so.
Yeah, and obviously he was there for he wasn't just there for a short time. He was there for a few years as well, wasn't he?
Yeah. I think was he there? Was he there when Robinho went as well? Did they have Robinho?
I think he was there when Robinho turned up. More importantly for me, he was there when Beckham turned up on loan from LA Galaxy.
Yeah.
And again, just seeing,
was Zlatan as well up front.
Zlatan was, yeah, Zlatan up front as well. I think they had Pato as well in
Yeah,
their
Alexander
squad
Pato,
too.
yeah.
So this wasn't the efficient trophy winning side of Milan that Carlo Ancelotti had bred. This was just like, fuck it, Milan. We'll just sign
Yes.
everyone, and it was so much fun to see. I've got in my mind now just a Beckham absolutely hitting a sweet diag, and diag at 34 years old, that feels terrible to say that. Diagonal. And it just hitting Ronaldinho and him just taking it down at the end of his boot and then just throwing in a little, back heel around the right back.
Yeah.
It's just phenomenal stuff. And, after that, he ends up going back to Brazil, which I think has, really, really nice sort of like parallels. And I do enjoy seeing Brazilians going back home. And I think it shows the strength of the league there. Neymar at Santos right now, for example. He finishes at Fluminense. Like I say, he went back to Brazil, but then went to Mexico for a little while, which, again, fun. I don't think it really went too well in Mexico, so he was there for quite a short time, but finishes at Fluminense and then becomes a futsal player in India. Again, very fun. But I suppose for Ronaldinho, it goes back to where he was as a child, as a teenager. He just did things for the sake of it because he wanted to do them. He didn't need to be a futsal player in India, did he? He just did it because he wanted to.
Yeah. And again, that's him. You think of him, and he should always be thought of as the player who had the smile on his face as he's doing some sort of ridiculous step over / shoulder drop, turn the defender inside out. That's futsal, isn't it? That's just what he does. It's the ball sticks to your foot like glue, and you make everybody who's trying to take it off you look daft. And he was an expert at that.
No, I always tried to think I was like that because I was far too slow to be, a person who beats his man. Let's put it that way. So it was always skill school as I was concerned, but never the levels of this man. I suppose, like you say, we can maybe wrap up with something jovial to talk about. We've probably all watched some Joga Bonito football this week now on the back of this podcast. I wanted to press you, Paul. Which was your favourite advert for this one? Because I just think this is the nib of nostalgia that really made this week for me. And as we spoke about before I came onto the podcast, this has been a fucking awful week for me at work and that. And the light relief of watching some Ronaldinho Joga Bonito adverts has kind of kept me going. Looking forward to getting on speaking to you about it.
Well, I'm glad that I've given you something to focus on that's positive. It's hard to choose because obviously the boat, the one on the battle barge, I think it was called, wasn't it? Yeah, the original one, but they're in the cage. That is so cool, and it was the original. And you look at the names on there, bearing in mind that Ronaldinho is still young, as we covered earlier. At that point, I sent you a screenshot of going, look at the names of those other players in there because there's a big scoreboard, isn't there? And that's incredible. But then I really like the airport one as well. There's something about that that's special. So I think if I had to choose, I'd go with the original, but on the boat, the Nike advert there. But I've also got in my head that in addition to them two, that there's probably one I'm forgetting that also had the Elvis song on it. I feel like there was a run of being like a new one every couple of months.
Yeah, the one I've got in my mind that I watched, which had the Elvis music on it, and I don't know if it was, but it was the Brazil v Portugal Olé advert. That's the one I've got in my mind.
Yeah,
and it was when Figo just puts it through R9's legs and goes Olé, and then basically just kicks off. But the thing I quite like about that advert is that it's obviously got all this skill between the Brazilian and the Portuguese, the Brazilian Portuguese players. Obviously, no Cristiano Ronaldo at this time, so we're looking at some proper alto. Helder Postiga is in this advert, which we never thought we would stay. Francesco Totti is in the advert as well because the ball goes out the stadium, he takes it on his knee and he kicks it back in the stadium in a very Totti style. And then eventually it ends up with, and one of the most iconic things I can remember trying to do, which was prime Ronaldinho, was that little flick on the outside of the boot and then flick it right on the inside, like a cowlick. I don't know really what they called it, but he just sort of like flicked it on the outside of it and then immediately flicked it into the inside of his boot and sent his man the wrong way. But then as soon as he did that, he got wiped out by the referee. And then it's like, get in the centre circle. And it's just all the Portuguese and Brazilian players battered and bruised and just like getting ready to play the game. And that's the one for me that just sticks out as like the greatest Nike advert ever.
I that one I do recall now you mentioned it. And that move that you're talking about, I think it's called, and this I hate myself for this, I think it's called a flip flap. I think that might actually be what it's called. I'll have to ask somebody younger than me that knows for certain what that move's called, but I believe it's a flip flap.
I just remember watching it and thinking, like, I need to learn how to do that, but never could. You could ask me to do it now, and I can't. Like, to be fair, I can't do a lot of things now at this age, but like that was just the one for me where I was like, I've got to learn how to do that. Ronaldinho did it in that he did it in an advert, not even a real game. But like, I need to know how to do that skill. But yeah, I tell you what, if you've got yourself a spare 3-4 hours, go and watch some Ronaldinho highlights on YouTube, because some people have done absolutely brilliant jobs to compile some of the best bits. Watch some Joga Bonito adverts, watch some Nike adverts, the Pepsi one as well from the Wild Wild West. Chef's kiss. Juan Sebastian Veron in that as well is also incredible. And it's just you'll come out feeling happy, won't you, Paul?
Absolutely. It's I've lost hours in the last few days, because the other thing as well is like when you're watching it suggests another one for you, and you know I know I'm old enough and smart enough to know how these things work, but it's really hard to go, oh, you know, I've watched enough now when you're an hour and a half into it.
Yeah.
This next one's only 8 minutes, I'll watch that and then
sat there on your phone, your daughter comes to you. Can I have me dinner, Daddy? Yeah, give me 2 minutes. Dad, it's been 4 hours. Oh shit, it's tea time. That kind of thing. But do yourself a favour, get onto that. And happy birthday, Ronaldinho Gaucho, as well. We'll end that on 45 years young, play beautifully, Joga Bonito. And what a pleasure to grow up in that era, Paul. It was absolutely brilliant. I suppose we'll wrap up. For me, as always, I've got to plug some of my other podcasts, one less than I used to do, but we did release a new episode of El Pozo, which is the Primera Ref show. If you're interested in learning more about Spanish football and what is beyond the La Liga setup, do go give that a listen. That's myself and Liam Bambridge of the Spanish Segunda show, talking about some pretty mad stuff, Paul. This week we spoke about Merida had a parade of dogs for their lineup, which was very strange, but definitely worth a listen if you can. Paul, I'll say thank you for you once again. Like I say, this has been the absolute joy of my week so far. I've got memories unlocked, which I put into the back of my mind. So I appreciate you joining me to talk about Ronaldinho.
Oh, likewise. It's always a pleasure, Nick. I've really enjoyed this one. Like I say, I've lost some hours doing the research for this one. Pleasure as always, and looking forward to the next one already.
Yes, let's get our thinking hats on what we can go for next week as we take another trip back down memory lane, nostalgia avenue, as we keep saying, here at El Partido. Go and find us on Twitter or Instagram if you'd like to see us more during the week. But I will say thank you very much for listening at home. We'll see you next time, and hasta luego.